Welcome, all of you fellow arcanists out there, to the Frith Guild podcast, where we explore the amazing world full of mystical creatures and their partners. My name is Eric, and I'll be your guide along this journey through pirate-infested waters. So you better strap on your swords and get ready to defend the seas from evildoers. I'll be talking all things mystical creatures and swashbuckling tales throughout this series. If you have not caught up to the chapters being discussed today, I urge you to hit the pause button to read to catch up. I will be here when you get back. I'll be avoiding spoilers throughout the reading and encourage everyone to send me your thoughts and comments on the chapters and your favorite moments and creatures within. Alas, it is now time to set sail and begin our voyage across the seas. Hello and welcome back to this podcast. Before I get started into the chapter recap and everything, I just wanted to make mention that it is December 9th on the day that I'm recording this. And I just wanted to wish you guys a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And for those that are not celebrating Christmas, Happy Hanukkah and Happy Holidays for anybody else if I'm missing your denomination. And just want to mention that, all right, getting into the chapter 15 recap. And the last chapter ended off with Illia and Volke talking about the opportunity training under Gregory Ruma, until Volke mentions that he didn't get an invitation from Ruma. To Volke's amazement, Illia quotes a step from the pillar: loyalty. Without it, we cannot know true friendship. Illia reminds Volke to meet by the lake before sunrise and threatens to not go and have to wake him up in the morning. Chapter 16 starts at the side of the lake where all 6 apprentices are waiting eagerly for their masters to come out and start training them on their magic. Insults are already being thrown out to Illia this early in the morning, and lo and behold, Zaxxas is the first one that snaps to her defense. Shoot, even offers her his jacket as he doesn't feel cold at all. We meet Hexa and her Hydra Raisin and find out that she was really trying to compliment Illia, but okay. We also meet Adelgis. Master Ruma is the only one showing up today and is a bit perplexed on having 5 apprentices, and Adelgis and Illia curb stomp his ego by not taking his offer to train under him. Well, until Master Zelfrey decides to show up and train them himself. We learn all 3 types of magic, and everyone gets their shot at taking out Master Ruma, and they're all scared they will actually hurt him. Chapter 17, Volke makes a terrifying discovery about his abilities. He can evoke terrors, like make people see their worst fears in their head and cripple them until he releases it. This still comes at a cost to Volke, and then a bell tolls, and there is a new threat on the horizon. A bunch of ships that are adrift and not being manned at all. Well, that's weird, but okay. Volke wants to be trained so he can manage on his own and not be a hindrance to Luther, and Luther treats Volke like a glass doll. Well, no more worries about those mystery ships. They're all on fire, and while everyone is watching the pretty fire like a moth to a flame, Luther actually suggests to go out and sneak around for evidence. Chapter 18 picks up, hopefully nothing is locked, so Volke can claim that he just accidentally stumbled into the wrong place of the manor house. Well, so much for that. Luther sinks himself to common thievery practices by going through the shadows to the other side of the door to unlock it. Moving further down the hall, they find the common area for the Master Arcanist. Or is it really just Ruma's? Volke wanders up into Ruma's private chambers, and all that is there is a super huge bed. When he hears some arguing enter the common room. Well, this is it. Looks like he will get caught. Oh wait, there's a window he can jump out of. But as soon as he leaves the window frame, it disappears. That is the least of Volke's concerns at this moment, as Master Zelfrey happens to be just below the vanishing window. Volke, if there is one time to just keep quiet, this is it. Well, after digging yourself a grave, the first thing you gotta do is put down the shovel. Chapter 19, well, let's get the hell away from Zelfrey and get back to our room. But not without running into Zaxxas too. Zaxxas basically tells Volke that he has been dishonoring the island his entire life because of his lack of caring about others. I say, why bother? No one cared about him. Zaxxas tries to pull Volke to the principal's office, but Volk hits him and Forsyth with a little bit of tear, and they both drop, and Zaxus retorts with flames. And Luther has to break them up by grabbing them by their scruff. Volk just wants to get some sleep when he is woken up by Illia climbing into his room with Hexa. Maybe I'll have some of what they're drinking. After Volk says something, or maybe doesn't say something to Illia about her scar, Illia is upset with him and doesn't feel like talking to him. After a few days, Master Zelfrey finally shows up to finally start training his apprentices. Moving into chapter 20, the best way to teach is to have them try to attack the Master Arcanist. At least this is what Zelfrey decides. For some reason, everybody's super concerned about this and acts like they're going to easily overpower them and kill them. Well, maybe it was easier than Volk thought as Zelfrey falls off the edge of the turtle shell. JK, shadows don't fall. Volk starts to practice on his own, giving himself a horrible nosebleed, the strain of getting ready to use his magic. Dang, this whole second bonding pain needs to settle down. So Volk gives it another go, and all of a sudden, he is on Gentle's fin. Of course, more blood covering him, but that isn't the biggest concern, as a siren is eating at Gentle. Alright, chapter 16, a little bit more of a deep dive into it. We're introduced to Hexa Deteni and Elrin Raisin the Hydra. Hex's is from Regal Heights, where scars are shown as a sign of toughness and not of damage. Hexa did not realize that things are different with the Islanders, and she puts her foot in her mouth pretty hard when she makes a comment to Illia's scars in front of everybody. And Illia is already super self-conscious about this, but again, Hexa not knowing how the Islanders, or even outside of Regal Heights, is concerned, that is not a very polite or, good thing to say to somebody, especially when you just first meet him. Surprisingly, Zaxus stands up for Illia when Hexa comments on her scars, and is actually pretty fast about it. Volk is actually like, I should have stood up for her first. I shouldn't have let Zaxus stand up for Illia. And then to make matters, I don't say worse, but Zaxus then notices that Illia is shaking because of how cold it is outside, and Zaxus offers Illia his coat. And again, Volk is like, well, I should have offered Illia my coat, not him. And Zaxus does say that he doesn't feel cold since he's been bonded with Forsyth. This is kind of alluding to a innate ability, passive ability that Phoenix Arcanists have, which is that they're always warm. They don't get affected by cold anymore. We also get to meet Adelgis Venrover for the first time. And Adelgis completes out the 6 Arcanists that are going to be apprenticing with the Frith Guild and with the 2 masters, Master Ruma and Master Zelfrey. And as they're getting acquainted, Master Ruma comes out and is formally introduces himself and is talking about having 5 apprentices that he's going to have to teach. And Volk kind of clicks it together that he was the only one that was not offered to be apprenticed under him. And he kind of takes that kind of hard, and he has to think back about the whole Luther being Eldrin, and Luther claiming that Ruma, killed Mathis, and so it's kind of an understandable statement if Ruma didn't want Volk as a apprentice. But Master Zelfrey doesn't come out, so we're all essentially going to have to train under him anyways. And again, during the conversation about having so many apprentices, Illia raises her hand to tell him that she is not going to be apprenticing under Ruma. She's going to be apprenticing under Master Zelfrey. And Adelgis actually does the same thing right after Illia, and Ruma takes quite a hard ego blow right there, and he even states that his ego may not be able to handle this. So we're introduced to the 3 main types of magic. They are evocation, manipulation, and augmentation. Evocation, that's when you create something with your magic. So fire, lightning, something like that, something of that sort. Whatever your Eldrin has, whatever kind of elemental properties your Eldrin has, is what you're going to be able to create. Manipulation, that's when you control the elements associated with your Eldrin. So this is something that's already in existence that you are manipulating. So if you have a water type Eldrin, you'll be able to manipulate the water. Kind of reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the cartoon, and by no means the live action movie that they made that was absolutely horrible. So they're actually able to move the water or move the fire or earth or whatever it is that they actually possess, or whatever Eldrin elemental they are. And then augmentation is when you alter something with magic. So you're taking something and making it something else. And again, these are the three core types of magic for every single Eldrin. Some we don't see all three types in the books, but again, every single mystical creature is capable of all three. And there's also other things like innate abilities or passive abilities that each Eldrin is capable of being able to. Again, depending on the Eldrin and depending on what kind of elemental they are, will allow them to be able to do certain things. Like I explained earlier with Zaxis and Forsyth, because Zaxis is a phoenix and because phoenixes are made of fire, Zaxis is no longer cold. We do also get a very good demonstration of how large Gentle is in this chapter, and or at least how large the shell of Gentle is. I mean, I know we have a manor house on there. There's a lake on there. There's an island inside of the lake with a fountain that's, the size of 3 grown people. But we get an actual numerical value given to the lake in this chapter. We know that the lake on Gentle's back is roughly 1,000 feet across. And again, for comparison, 1,000 feet it would be almost the exact height of the Eiffel Tower. The Eiffel Tower is 1,063 feet. So that's how far across the lake on Gentle is. All right, getting off of the size of Gentle, we're going to start with evocation, and that's what Master Ruma has them practice with first. He's basically going to have them try and attack him and see what they can do as far as their evocation goes. Addie goes first, and she does actually a fairly good job at sending fire at him. He is able to block it fairly easily because, again, he's a Master Arcanist. He's been through this a few times, so he's also able to control water, so he's able to use the lake and it's the water within it to extinguish the flames before it gets to him. It surprises me that everybody's very concerned about hurting the Master Arcanists, or basically anybody outside of the apprentices, with their magic. Like they've been bonded for all of like maybe a month, not even a few weeks, a couple weeks, and they think that they can take down a Master Arcanist. Like kudos to them for having the grandeur idea that they are going to be able to hurt him. Realistically speaking, they're not going to. Addie goes up and gets a fairly high praise from Master Ruma. And then Zaxis goes up to give it a try, and Zaxis does a fairly good job too, but doesn't get really any kind of positive feedback, just okay. And Zaxis is frustrated, and he says, I want to do this, I want to go again. And he tries to actually Ruma off guard and send a blast and then jump and then try to send another blast from a different angle. But again, Ruma is just too skilled to be anywhere in danger of getting hurt by his fire. We see Hexa and Raisins. We see their evocation of poisonous gas. That again, Ruma is able to use his wind to push the gas away and not be any kind of harmful. Adelgis uses looks like basically like an arrow made of light. Again, Ruma is very easily able to get out of the way of it, and it just kind of keeps sailing straight through. We don't actually see Adeligis's Eldrin, so this is something that we'll find out about later on in the book. Actually, even just as I'm recording this, I'm realizing, the light arrow, and again, it makes me go back to Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda series, pretty much any game that incorporated the light arrow. So Majora's Mask, Breath of the Wild. Again, build this big Zelda nerd, sorry. All right, moving into chapter 17 is Volk's turn to go up and have his go with trying to do something, evoke his powers. And Volk is very reluctant to use his magic because he remembers the last time he tried to do it, he was on the boat and it hurt him quite a bit. So he's just kind of that, doesn't want to get hurt again, doesn't sure how it's going to work out, or if he's even going to be able to produce anything. He's standing there waiting to evoke his magic, and he doesn't want to do this in front of everybody. He doesn't want everybody to see him having to struggle like he does. Again, I can sympathize with him because of the fact that he's second bonded. He knows he's going to have to put a lot more effort into his actual training, and he's going to have to go through more pain than anybody else was going to have to go through. But either way, he's still going to have to learn how to do it. Volk is hesitant about using his magic, and Luther tells Volk, if that's the case, then just go back to the Isle of Ruma. If you're not going to attempt or even try, then what's the point? I am gonna read a quote from Luther that I really do enjoy, and a lot of the quotes that Luther says I actually really like a lot whenever he does have a speaking part. Luther says, "The world doesn't create furrows for the river. The water cuts its own path through mountains, rocks, and forests, not with sheer power, but perseverance. Ruma was right. Imagine the water is your magic. You must persist no matter the obstacles." And this is a huge commentation by Luther, and it's one hell of a pep talk. And shoot, I wish I had Luther to give me those kinds of pep talks from time to time. And he basically says, like, you won't ever achieve anything if you don't try, if you don't put effort in, and basically, you're gonna have to be the one that makes change. So Volk again is working on getting his evocation, and it does take these new arcanists time to, I guess, I don't say charge up, but channel their energy to be able to evoke. And Volk starts to, and at first nothing's happening, and then he goes for it again, and then all of a sudden everybody around him is screaming for him to stop. And he's at first he's like, stop, like, not doing anything, or they tell me to stop trying because I'm not doing anything, and then Volk kind of realizes that they're yelling at him to stop because everybody's on their knees grasping at their head because he's inducing literal nightmares into their heads, into their minds. And even Ruma is actually thrown off by this. He forgets that nightmares evoke actual nightmares. So before Volk has a chance to go at it again with it, there's a bell starts ringing. Basically, he's warning the whole of the guild that there's some, what we would assume, pirate ships are coming up to them. And it turns out there are just 5 ships that are coming up, and they're actually all abandoned, and they're just floating through the sea. And so they get told by Ruma to go straight to the manor house, do not exit or do not go anywhere else outside until they're told otherwise. Rather than just wasting the time sitting around wondering what's going on and all that stuff, Luther and Volk actually decide, you know what, let's start work on his swordsmanship. And Volk is very much so, I want to be in control of the shadows. I don't care if they're going to hurt me if I do. I don't want to be dead weight to somebody else. Luther is actually just trying to say, like, look, let me do all the work. I'm a master swordsman. I know everything. I know I can fight. Don't worry about it. I can take care of this. And again, Volk says, no, I'm going to be the one to learn as well because I'm not going to leave everything up to you. I won't be a burden. Luther does teach Volk to kill fast to avoid being killed because Luther knows that Volk is disadvantaged with most when it comes to most other arcanists, anybody else, basically, pirates, anybody that wields a sword. After a while of practice, Luther and Volk realize that they're actually setting the other ships on fire, and everybody's at a loss as to why. So at that point, Luther says, "Well, I'm pretty certain that most of the other arcanists out here are going to be a little bit preoccupied with these boats. So how about we go investigate around the guild and try to see if we can't find some evidence that would either prove Luther right, prove Luther wrong." So Volk's kind of walking around, and he comes to the first locked door, and Luther says, "Hang on a minute, I'll slip through and unlock it from the other side." And he does, and Volk kind of is like, "Wait a minute, you can do this?" And Luther says, "Well, I don't generally try to use my abilities for petty thievery." Volk also has this feeling that he's being watched. So let's see how that goes into the next chapter of chapter 18. And Volk and Luther continue down the corridor that was locked, and they find another locked door, and Volk was kind of like, well, Luther says, well, nobody keeps trash locked up. Luther goes in, unlocks the door for him, and at first we're like, oh, this has got to be Ruma's room, because all of his keepsakes and mementos that he has from his previous escapades. He's got the broken window, the stained glass window from the chapel that he was married at, and all these other trinkets and stuff of things that he's done. Volk is just straight fanboying over everything. He's oh, I know this was from this story, and this was from that story, and these seers gave him these 3 statues. He's not quite sure why there's a statue of a phoenix, but we'll figure it out later, I guess. We don't know what these are going to be about until they come to pass. So there's 2 leviathans fighting. Again, we don't know what's going on with that until it comes to pass. So we'll have to just hope that it comes around at some point. And he's got pirate flags and all these things from these pirates that he's taken out. Luther starts looking around through the other locked doors, and we come to realize that this isn't Ruma's room. This is all of the Master Arcanist rooms. And Luther actually had found Ruma's quarters that he lives, sleeps in. Luther does go in and unlock the door to Ruma's quarters, and Volk goes up there, and he starts to look around. Again, I love the mention, just the sheer mention of the size of the bed that Ruma has that could fit 3 people in, no problem. It could consume 3 people. I imagine Ruma has to take an Uber or whatever would be the relative term in that in this world, what that would be. So probably to get one sheet corner on to the other sheet corner on. Volk's looking around in the quarters, and the one thing you don't want to have happen when he's doing that happens. And he starts to hear people talking or basically arguing down below. So Volk is like, crap, we are screwed. We're going to get caught, and we're going to get thrown out of the guild, basically, because we're sneaking around into the guildmaster's, the Master Arcanist's quarters. Like, clearly not supposed to be here. So Volk looks around, and he sees a window, and he's like, well, this is the only way I can get out of here, so I guess we're going to have to go through the window. And just as he's about to get himself seated on the windowsill, the ledge on the outside of the window, he notices that there's a Rizzle pelt. And if we remember that Mathis died on an island that was famous for the Rizzles, or at least the Rizzle breeding grounds. Volk is on the actual outside of the window. He's about to jump from the 2nd story, and he turns back to look at the window, and he realizes the window's no longer there. And that's kind of odd, because he literally just came out of it. He's gonna have to do the one thing he doesn't really want to, and he's gonna have to jump. And thankfully, Luther actually catches him, with the shadows. And again, it's kind of some foreshadowing, and I just realize I love this pun. and being able to use foreshadowing here, that Volk will be able to manipulate shadows like this later on. So once he gets up and he thinks he's scotch-free, Master Zelfrey shows up. Master Zelfrey is kind of like, oh, how did you just drop in? And before Volk could really even start saying anything, his mimic, Traces, comes out of the window that disappeared and basically was following Volk this whole time. Volk was basically like, oh, well, we we weren't told we couldn't go look around, and we weren't really, this, that, and the other, and like, well, Volk, it's one of those, just stop talking. There's nothing you can do or say to get yourself out of this, in order to, as I've learned, the first way to stop digging deeper holes is to put down the shovel. Zelfrey isn't necessarily surprised with Volk, and he even says that, even Volk does, the mischief wholly in full. Volk is kind of confused about this, and Zelfrey does make a mention of his past, and Volk immediately, oh, well, but I'm not my parents, I'm not a murderer, I'm not a thief. And Zelfrey was like, what are you talking about? And Volk was like, well, never mind. And Zelfrey's like, well, maybe now that you brought it up, okay, maybe I should be aware of this, but I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to the letter that William wrote, as far as your letter of recommendation, wrote, quote, William mentioned Volk would power through his problems, not following rules when you thought they were stacked against you. Makes for unpredictable apprentices. Most dedicated and hardworking young man, end quote. This is the best way to describe Volk. He's gonna do what he think is right, and he's gonna push through whether or not he is gonna have to follow the rules or not. Again, looking at the trial of worth for the Phoenixes, he shouldn't have been there. He handled bodies. Remember, there was three groups of jobs that were not allowed to participate in the trial of worth, and not only participate, but even be a part in the ceremony itself. So not even be present for the ceremony. It was the trash, the sewage, and those that handled dead bodies. Those three groups were not even allowed to be there for the ceremony. But yet Volk decided he's going to partake in it. He's going to do what he wants, what he thinks is right. Make his way out of Ruma. And again, Zelfrey comments on how hardworking and thorough the troublemaking will be if he's such a hardworking young man himself. Zelfrey basically says, everything that you just saw and did while you were up there and this conversation that we just had did not exist. And I strongly suggest that you go back to your room and never talk about it to anyone, especially the Rizzlepelt. He takes off, and we enter into chapter 19 as Volk is rounding the corner after getting scolded by Zelfrey and basically being told just to get the hell out and go back to your room. He, of course, runs and quite literally runs into Zaxxas. Zaxxas is trying to make sure that not only does their Isle keep their reputation, that everything and everyone from the Isle of Ruma is not lumped in with Volk, because Volk, I mean, in all intents and purposes, he wasn't born on it. He wasn't, his father and his mother weren't necessarily a member of the island. They had come to the island later on in life, and then they ultimately left as well, or was forced out. The other part, and Zaxxas is saying to Volk that this is exactly why Volk has been embarrassing the island of Ruma all this time. He doesn't think for others. He doesn't think about others. He doesn't care. Volk didn't care because he tried to participate in the trial of worth. He embarrassed all of the island when he did that, because Volk was trying to take away Zaxxas' Phoenix, which doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, trial of worth is open to anybody that's participating, and if that particular mystical creature doesn't want to bond with you, then it's not somebody else's fault. It's yours. But in a nutshell, I think Zaxxas is more so mad at Volk because Lyle isn't there with him. I've never had a brother growing up. I had a sister, an older sister. So I can sort of understand where he's coming from with that. as far as, if Lyle would have bonded, then Lyle would be with Zaxxas right now. He'd be able to keep with his, have his little brother next to him and be able to keep an eye out for his little brother as well, because his little brother is essentially never going to bond with anything. So just like anybody else would have happen, or any way this would have turned out, they both get into a fist fight. And then they start using their magic on each other, and Volk hits Forsyth and Zaxxas with a pretty good terror attack. And then Zaxxas goes to hit Volk with some flames, and Luther steps in front because, he's being a good Eldarin. Luther takes all of it and, is hurt himself because Luther is Shadow, and he just got hit with fire. It's definitely going to do some damage to him. Luther is basically like, look, this is not how Arcanists should react. But they shouldn't be resorting to using their own abilities over petty drama like this. And that gives something for Volk to chew on and realize how he is being a child in the way that he's acting, and that he needs to really, if he's going to use his magic against somebody, it's going to have to be for the right reason, not just for something petty like that. So Volk's finally back up in his room, and he's about to fall asleep. And of course, somebody's climbing through his window. And Illia climbs in, and then behind Illia is Hexa. They have obviously been drinking, which kudos to them. Finding alcohol on the ship within 2 days of being there, or on this turtle, then, Illia was making comments about how she doesn't really care about how her eye is, and she's not hiding it or covering it up. Volk's kind of like, well, but we're siblings, and Illia's like, well, but we've been orphaned together, but we grew up together, but we always just told people we're siblings to make it easier, but we're not really siblings. Volk kind of doesn't know what to say to that. He's always viewed her as a sister, as a sibling, and earlier I mentioned that's how he acts towards her. She's a sibling. In this kind of moment, there's that like, oh, did Illia actually may have looked at him as something different, something more than just a sibling. With her being drunk and with a lot of the emotions going and him not responding quite the way that she was expecting, they pretty much get out of there as soon as and fast as possible and go back to their own rooms. While they're trying to train with Master Ruma, she's basically giving him the cold shoulder, doesn't want to talk to him. Everything kind of gets kind of awkward between them for a good bit until Volk kind of addresses it and is like, well, but if we were more than just siblings, well, maybe Nicolin would say something or do this. And poor Nicolin being the third wheel in this whole conversation, because he's just like, I don't think you guys are talking about me particularly. I think you guys are talking to each other, but he's like, I could be wrong, but I don't know. I don't think you guys are talking about me. So on that day in particular, Master Zelfrey does come out and to begin training his 3 apprentices, as he should have been this whole time. Something must have drastically happened between Master Zelfrey and Master Ruma. Zelfrey basically, he pulls his 3 apprentices. He pulls Adelgis, Illia, and Volk away to train with him. Before Zelfrey can even get into his lesson plans or start explaining how he's going to be training them, Adele just puts his hand up like he's in school, and was basically like, look, what do we do if you're not here in the morning to train us? Do we train with Master Ruma? Or, and it's not an unreasonable question for the way that Zelfrey has not been attending and taking charge of his apprentices. And Zelfrey actually snaps back real fast with, you will not train under Ruma under any circumstance. There will be no more days that I am not here to train you. That is that, and we're no longer going to have this conversation. I'm putting it on my foot and telling you that's how it's going to be. Gotta love the Frith Guild and their mannerism of finding out how strong and how to train somebody is by just saying, hey, come at me, bro. and that's where we go into chapter 20. On chapter 20, we're standing at the edge of Gentle's shell, right where her head would be going into the shell. We also get a quick reference about how sea turtles cannot retract any of their limbs. Basically, their beaks and their tough skin and their shells, the edge of their shells, are what protect them. They can't pull their head or their fins into their shell. After an awkward, like, hey, who's going to come at me first? Volk kind of makes a slight cough that Zelfrey takes as okay, Volk, you're going to do first. Zelfrey's like, hey, I want you to try to knock me off the shell. And again, everybody's like, oh my gosh, we don't want to accidentally kill you. Please don't do this. We should be training a different way. And Zelfrey's like, look, I'm the master here, aren't I? So let me do my thing. So Traces forms into a Knightmare to be able to display the Knightmare's abilities as well. Volk is haphazardly, trying to attack Zelfrey with his sword, but not really, because again, he's kind of concerned about Zelfrey accidentally falling off the shell. Zelfrey's kind of like, well, shadows don't fall, but then he falls. Like, oh crap, we just killed Zelfrey. Like, kind of like Neville in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when he's on his second task and Harry takes the gillyweed and he goes in and he's not showing any sort of sign of that everything worked out well. And I'm stating the movie here and not the books. Neville is just, oh my gosh, I just killed Harry Potter. Oh my gosh. And then all of a sudden he's, doing backflips on the other side of the lake. Like, okay, we're good. Didn't die. We're all good. So Zelfrey, pops back up. Then he tries, go with old reliable with the terror attacks, and Zelfrey kind of laughs at him like, you're gonna try that on me? So then Zelfrey does the same thing. Zelfrey goes after him with terrors. This is something I guess I must have just misunderstood in the first couple of times that I've read through the books, because I assumed that Knightmares were just innately immune to all fear attacks or any mind altering attacks itself, but it's actually quoted that Knightmares have the ability to, and again the key phrase is have the ability to ward themselves from fear attacks from any mind altering magic. It's not that Volk is immune to it, but he's able to ward against it. So this is just another sign, another thing that Knightmares are able to do for Volk. Volk needs to remember he's shadows. So all I could picture then is reading this section was Lightning McQueen, I am speed. And that's what Volk has to remember. He has to embrace it. He is shadows. He must fully embrace that in order and become shadows to be able to wield his magic properly. Zelfrey kind of gives him that talk of that, hey, you have to embrace it. You have to show that you are shadows, and sees that Volk is just kind of like, he's slowly making the connection in his brain, and was like, Volk, go away, go practice on your own while you're trying to figure out what it is that I just told you, and to get those rusty gears going in your brain while I train somebody else, because you're too slow at this right now. Volk is working on his shadow stepping. And I don't think he realized what he was trying to do before he did it, but he definitely was trying to do his shadow stepping. And the first go around, he wasn't quite where he needed to be with his magic, but he was starting to get a severe nosebleed. Like the conversation that he had with Luther before about this is not going to be easy. And that Zelfrey even told him that he's going to have to work twice as hard to do the same thing as everybody else. So he has to put in the work. Volk manages to shadow step and goes into the void and realizes that there's no oxygen. He can't see. It's just black. He releases his magic, assuming that that's how he manages to get out of the void. Unfortunately, it's not. And when he finally does get out of the void, he's actually standing on Gentle's fin. Thinking that he's going to be the only person on Gentle's fin, he sees a siren which is described as a smaller Eldrin. It's got a magical voice. Most of the time, it's got a woman's face with a bird-like body with claw-like hands. This siren is just chewing on Gentle. And again, with how massive Gentle is, this wouldn't even be like a flea on a dog. It's absolutely tiny, and Gentle probably doesn't even notice that it's happening because, again, it's so small and irrelevant that, it's not even affecting her. Then it starts to say and do things that are in really familiar, not normal standards of talking, and it finally opens its eyes and it reveals that it's an arcane plague infected Eldarin. And this is where chapter 20 ends off, and we'll have to pick up in the next podcast episode. So we're going to move into our bestiary, and we have just a couple new Eldarin this time. So we're going to dive on into our bestiary section, and we only have roughly two new Eldarin that we're going to discuss this time. We're going to talk about mimics, and a mimic is basically the size and shape of a cat with an extremely long tail. And as far as their evocation, the augmentation, and manipulation, it'll be completely and entirely based upon whatever other mystical creature they are transformed into is going to what their powers are going to be. Now, when they transform into a different Eldarin, they can only use the power that the Eldarin they're copying from has. So, with Nicolin being a very young Rizzle, that means that Traces would only be able to use the magic that Nicolin has available. So, he's able to project white fire that particleizes everything, and he's able to teleport certain things. That's all Traces would be able to do. When Traces turns into Luthair, Traces is basically able to do everything that a fully grown Knightmare would be able to do. So its power is wholly based on what it turns into and how powerful that creature is that it turns into. And then we're also talk about the Siren, and I kind of described it already just a few minutes ago. And all that we really know about them is their evocation magic, and that's essentially just that they have a mind controlling song. And that's really all I could find on the Siren. There wasn't really much else that I saw on the wiki fandom page. And again, if we read further and find some, we'll definitely let them know to update. And then we're going to do our last section, which is the steps of the pillar. Step 12 is justice. Without it, we cannot differentiate from revenge. So that's the last step that we're given an exact step number when it was the step was introduced. We have quite a few that don't have step numbers next to them. However, the wiki on Frith wiki, the fandom wiki that we have, does give out step numbers. So we'll talk about the next one is going to be preparation. Without it, we leave our fate to chance. And the last one is bravery. Without it, we cannot act in the face of fear. I want to thank you guys all for listening to the podcast. And again, you can find this podcast on Podbean, Google Podcasts. It's going to be posted to my Facebook page, the Frith Guild podcast page. And if you want to shoot me a message or reach out to me on the Facebook page, it'll be perfect. If you have any questions that you'd like me to read on the podcast itself or talk with me about, you can also email me at frithguildpod@gmail.com. And I want to give out a huge shout out to the Frith Chronicles wiki page. And I would strongly suggest checking them out, as this is a great resource to kind of help look through things as you're reading through to kind of help not only keep track of what their abilities are, but They also have some really great fan art, and I believe that the author Shammy Stovall has definitely added and gave her a thumbs up for that stuff as well. Please do not forget to leave a review and a comment for me and to let me know how I'm doing, what I can be improving on, and share it with anybody you know that loves this series. And again, if you'd like to join me as a co-host, please email me or message me on my Facebook page, and we can certainly work something getting that set up. And I just want to remind everybody that I will be doing my interview with Shammy Stovall here in a couple weeks. If you have any questions you would like to ask her, please send those to me in my email at frithguildpod@gmail.com or to my Facebook page. Either post on there or send me a message on my Facebook page at the Frith Guild Podcast, and I'll be certain to ask her your questions. Again, I need those in by, honestly, the end of this week that this podcast comes out to make sure I have a chance to get those in on the interview. Thank you, and we'll talk to you guys next week.